What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're talking about aircraft carriers and what their place in War Thunder could be. Now, aircraft carriers are obviously, not something that is very likely to come to the game, and it's actually already technically in the game. There are aircraft carriers on a couple of Air RB game or maps. Mostly, you find aircraft carriers in Simulator, where you can take off on them if you're in a naval aircraft like an F-14 or an A7 or anything that flew off of carriers in real life. Now, real quick before we get too far into this video, it would mean a lot to me if you guys hit the like button and subscribed. Only about 7% of my current viewers are subscribed, and it really helps out the channel and means a lot to me. So, a lot of people have said the savior of naval will be aircraft carriers, and really there's no real way to add aircraft carriers in an effective strategy. I can't see how they'd be both playable for the player themselves, unless, it literally is a giant vessel that you drive around and people can land and take off on you. But that would be more modern naval. Obviously, we would probably have to wait till we got more advanced destroyers and other vessels before we ever even start to talk about getting carriers. Not to say that World War II carriers wouldn't work. I just think naval would have to have a big rework to be able to handle all that. Not to say that this couldn't happen. Obviously, it would be very, very unique to see carriers in the game. The big issue I would see with that, obviously, is that there is no balancing of carriers, and that is literally because the U.S. operates the majority of aircraft carriers. The only non-nuclear aircraft carrier, I believe, is French, or maybe Japanese. I know there's only one other super carrier that is not U.S., and I believe it's either Japanese or French. Russia has one aircraft carrier. The U.S., last time I checked, has 11 super carriers on top of landing vehicles, or LVTs, that are used by the Marines that can operate the F-35, Harriers, and attack helicopters like the AH-1 Zulu and the UH-1 WWII Venom. So, obviously, balancing is something that would have to be taken into effect. I mean, really, that would be, realistically speaking, having to put post-World War II American carriers that were modified to handle Tomcats and other afterburning aircraft. So maybe the USS Forstall, a very, very early USS Enterprise, to go up against the top, Russian, the Kuznetsov, I believe is what it is, the top Russian carrier, because simply put, that's just the only way you're going to get balance. If you were to ever add a U.S. super carrier with any of its technical abilities, it just would not be, necessarily fair. I mean, obviously, in-game you can nerf it. I mean, the real pros in-game of a nuclear carrier would, one, be it's faster, two, it would definitely have a lot more firepower compared to earlier carriers, and then really, that's kind of it. IRL, the reason for nuclear carriers is obviously fuel efficiency. They only have to be refueled about one time in their entire life. That is a lot better than having to bring around vessels to refuel your carrier everywhere. You don't really need that, you don't want that in a combat zone, obviously. So really speaking, I think the best way for carriers to be integrated instead of how they are right now, if we were to go in a player route, would be to add carriers that are player usable. You would just drive them around. Aircraft in Air RB or Naval RB would be able to land and take off of you. This is actually I think would be a big advantage, and actually a cool feature, because right now aircraft in Naval spawn pretty far away from the actual battle, and this would allow them to be closer to the action. Obviously, you'd be able to carry your catapult. You'd be able to land on a carrier to rearm. It's a lot better than flying around super far distances, sometimes up to 10 miles in a prop plane, to drop a torpedo just to then go rearm. So it actually is something that I think would be very, very unique to come. I do think right now the game could actually handle World War II carriers. I mean, as far as actual offensive weaponry goes, most aircraft carriers that the U.S. Navy had in World War II were armed with 4 or 5-inch cannons, which were found on destroyers of most classes of U.S. destroyers in World War II, most notably being the Fletcher class. So it's not entirely game changing. I know Japanese carriers had a much lighter armament. I don't believe they carried 4 or 5-inch guns. Obviously, they'd have a lot of AA guns. That was the real biggest threat besides submarines for carriers, was aircraft. So really, realistically speaking, you'd see they'd be kind of play as they would get aircraft occasionally. There'd be barges. There'd basically be barges with AA guns, and for as far as like U.S. naval aircraft carriers, they'd have 4 or 5-inch cannons. Obviously, post World War II, most of those carriers were modified to carry or to get the decks that went off to the side. They get the angled deck. They lost their 5-inch cannons. The carrier I volunteer on the USS Lexington, she underwent that modification in the 50s. She lost all 4 of her 5-inch guns, but she got the angled deck. And that's what a lot of post-World War II carriers had. They got the angled deck, and then they lost their 5-inch guns. I believe once missiles became a real big thing, obviously a lot of those aircraft or carriers gained the air-to-air, and actually I even heard of air-to-surface missiles fitted on carriers like the Harpoon. So obviously this is just, there's a more advanced carriers. I think carriers would be really fun to get when we're more advanced, but World War II carriers could absolutely come right now as a player thing. I think it'd be really unique. I just think the big issue is like people not able to spawn in aircraft right away, or obviously like not being that many aircraft. I mean, I really at times can only see 3-4 people max spawn in an aircraft in a game of Naval RB, but that's just what I've seen. Obviously, I think with some reworking, Naval could definitely get carriers. I think it'd be a lot of fun. Let me know what your guys' thoughts are on, obviously aircraft carriers coming for Naval, but just aircraft carriers getting being able to be more widely used in the game. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. The Discord will be linked down below in the description, and make sure to comment what you guys' thoughts are. And I hope to see you guys in a later video.